Welcome to Coming Out of the Spiritual Closet with your host, me, Brittany Wittig. Join me every week to explore and demystify the world of modern spirituality. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining me again this week. So I want to talk about making aligned decisions. And what I mean by aligned decisions are decisions that are in alignment with your higher self rather than decisions that are satisfying to your ego. Because those are two different things. And as we experience spiritual awakening, our world is kind of shaken up. And a lot of times we begin to get presented with more and more and more decisions and more life-changing, life-altering decisions. And so I think that this is such an important topic because getting better at making those aligned decisions will make your entire awakening process so much smoother and easier. So first, if we're talking about making decisions that are aligned with your higher self versus your ego, then first we need to talk about what your ego is. You know, you probably hear the word ego thrown around. And in some spiritual circles, you'll hear a lot of vilifying of the ego, talking about how we need to get rid of our ego and our ego is bad. And I don't personally ascribe to that way of looking at the ego. The ego is an important part of who you are. It's just not supposed to be in the driver's seat. And culturally, most of us grow up learning how to have our ego in the driver's seat, controlling our lives. So that's one of the things in spiritual awakening that you kind of learn to adjust, is not letting your ego make all of the decisions, but it doesn't mean that your ego is bad or that you need to get rid of your ego. Okay, so what is your ego? Your ego is your anchor in this 3D reality. It's an essential part of existing in the physical world. Your ego is what manages survival. It's what keeps you alive. Your ego is what tells you, this hurts, get away from it. I'm going to protect you from this painful thing. It's very protective. It's the part of you that worries. It's the part of you that thinks about pleasure. And so if you think about that from a biological point of view, that's really important. Eating food is pleasurable. Reproducing is pleasurable. These are all things that your ego makes you crave, that are essential to human survival. But as I'm listing these things, you can probably imagine how the ego can get out of control if we let it be in charge. Because the ego also doesn't understand when we've had enough pleasure, when to use moderation. And the ego always is trying to make sure that you are winning, and I'm using air quotes here, but if you think about like survival competition, which is ingrained in us deeply biologically, the ego is always in survival competition mode. So the ego is always trying to make you right, other people wrong. It wants you to be at the top of the hierarchy. And that's why, if the ego is in charge, we can run into a lot of issues. A lot of modern societies are structured in a very egoic way. So, understanding what your ego is and the purpose that it serves makes it a lot easier to understand which decisions are ego-based and which decisions are aligned with your higher self. One of the key things that will let you know that it's your ego talking is if you get into this polarized thinking where you're right and someone else is wrong. And I'm sure you've noticed there's a ton of that happening in the world today. Yeah, black and white thinking, right or wrong, that's all very, very egoic because, again, the ego wants you to win. It wants you to be at the top of a hierarchy. We know now, after having talked about this, we don't need the ego to be in the driver's seat of our life. And it's actually so much more satisfying to use our ego the way it was designed to be used, I think, which is to help us know when we need to eat, when we need to sleep, when we need certain things, but not allow it to make the decisions. Okay, so decisions that are aligned with your higher self, the reason that we want to be making decisions from that place is because our higher self, our soul, our connection to the universe, that energy wants to guide us to our path of least resistance and to our path of the most joy. You've probably heard the saying, follow your bliss. Joseph Campbell originally wrote that in one of his books. And that idea of like following your bliss, following your joy, that is your higher self guiding you. So it makes life so much more enjoyable, so much less painful when you start allowing your higher self, the universe, to guide your decisions. So how do we tell the difference between an egoic decision and an aligned decision? Well, one big thing is your emotions are a guidance system. When a decision feels really, really good, that is an aligned decision. I mean, this is just at the very basic level. If a decision or a situation feels painful or bad, then that is not aligned with your higher self. But this can get really confusing if you're not used to sensing the difference. A decision that feels right to your ego usually will involve a lot of safety, security, the illusion of control. And I say the illusion because control itself is actually an illusion. There's no such thing. Everything is moving so fast all the time. Everything is always in motion and everything is always changing. And so the idea that we have control over our environment itself is an illusion. And it's an illusion that comes from the ego because the ego likes the idea of being in control because that's safe. That feels safe. So a decision that comes from the ego feels secure, safe. There's the illusion of control. And it will feel easy, but it won't feel deeply moving or satisfying. And occasionally, I should say, occasionally it won't even feel easy. Occasionally it will feel like a lot of work because your ego believes that working hard is the only way to win. So a decision that is aligned with your higher self, with your soul, with the universe, it's going to feel really different. It's going to feel calm. It's going to feel deeply right. However, an important thing to point out here is that a lot of times an aligned decision does feel scary. It does feel like stepping out and taking a leap of faith. You know it's aligned because when you think about what would happen after that leap of faith, you imagine how it would feel after. It feels really good. The idea of what it would feel like after is really positive. So I'm going to give you an example of this just because I think it'll give it more context. So let's say that you know you want to start a new career. You have been dreaming about this new career, very different than anything you've ever done, but it's something you think about. It's been popping into your mind for ages. You love the idea of it. You read about this new career in your free time. You fantasize about what it would be like, but you are still in your old job, working your old job, not moving towards this career that you dream about. That decision to remain in your job is an egoic decision. It feels safe. It feels secure. It's very easy. You just stay in your job. It feels like stability, like it's giving you stability and this illusion of control. Now, if you were to quit your old job and start moving into this new career, this dream career, that would be an aligned decision. It would feel like a big choice to make, and it would probably feel pretty scary to take that leap, but it would move you into this thing that feels joyful and exciting and beautiful to you on a deep level. And once you've made that leap into the new career, it feels like you've done something powerful and brave. That's another thing that comes along with an aligned decision. So that's a basic rundown of how an aligned choice feels versus an egoic choice. And actually, the reason that this subject came up for me is recently I feel like I've been making a lot of aligned choices again. There was a period of time early in my awakening when I made many, many, many aligned choices and took lots of leaps of faith. And recently, I haven't had as many of those come up in like the last year and a half. And suddenly, recently, they're coming up again. All of these choices, all of these options, all of these decisions. And so I was on a walk this morning and just thinking about this, and I thought this would be a perfect thing to share. So for me, an example of how I make big decisions now, it's just so interesting. I've done this so much that I have a real radar for, is this my ego or is this my higher self guiding me? For instance, my partner and I were in the kitchen yesterday talking, and he turned to me and he said, "So in the spring, do you want to go to Spain and walk the Camino?" For those who aren't familiar, the Camino de Santiago is a, I think, 600-mile hike across the entire country of Spain that pilgrims have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. My partner and I have sort of had this on our dream list for a while. So he turned to me and he asked me, and I was cooking at the time, and I said, "Well, let me think about it." And I thought about it for a few minutes, and I tapped in to my higher self. Like, how does this feel to my higher self? And immediately it felt right. It felt really good. It felt a little nerve-wracking, a little overwhelming, because that's a big decision to make, but it felt good. And so after, I don't know, maybe about 5 minutes, I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. And that was it. Now we're planning it. Once you really get this sense of what an aligned decision feels like, once you really get that dialed in for yourself, and the way you get it dialed in is by making some of these big aligned decisions. But once you get that dialed in, it becomes so easy to make these decisions. Because the next step after the decision, and this is important to mention as well, the next step after the aligned decision is trust. Is trusting your higher self, trusting the universe, trusting that this thing would not feel so good if it wasn't meant for you. That's why it feels so good. That's what our emotional guidance system is for. It's to lead us in the path that our higher self wants us to take, and it feels good, so it's actually quite easy to follow. The next thing that has to happen is a lot of trust that things will work out the way they need to work out, that it's going to happen the way that it needs to happen, that everything will align, all of the steps as you move towards whatever the decision is that you've made, all of that's going to align, and the decision is for your highest good. So that's the next piece that really has to be practiced. Because what a lot of times will happen, especially when you're new to these kinds of decisions, is once you make that aligned decision, your ego is going to act up and start warning you about all the things that could go wrong with this decision, all of the things that may not work, all of the things that could be dangerous, in air quotes. Yeah, that's what your ego does, and it's your ego's job, you know? Your ego is doing exactly what it's meant to do, exactly what it's designed to do. The way to handle that is really love your ego and say thank you. You know, thank you, ego, for trying to protect me and making sure that I'm safe. I really appreciate that. And I am okay, so I'm not going to listen to you about this. I know that this decision is guided by my higher self, and I'm going to choose to trust my higher self and not listen to you on this one. I'm taking this particular decision out of your control and handing it to my higher self. And it's just an amazing practice. So, start small with this. Start out with smaller decisions that feel like they will align you with your higher self. An early small decision for me that was aligned with my higher self was just taking a break from drinking alcohol, and not even quitting drinking alcohol altogether, but just taking a break from it. That felt like something that my higher self wanted and something that my ego didn't like, because I had all of these, fun associations with having drinks with friends and all of these feel-good pleasure sensations around drinking alcohol. But that was a really simple one. That was a simple way to practice this. And the thing that was so interesting about that is, this was years ago now. And what was so interesting is I realized how much I really enjoyed not drinking alcohol. I don't enjoy regularly drinking. And I never would have known that if I didn't just make that one little aligned choice with my higher self. So start small, start with something that feels really manageable and see how it goes. Or alternatively, you could start big and just go for it. That's awesome too. And one thing that you can do if you're making an aligned decision and your ego's really acting up and really making you anxious and like you're really going through all of the what ifs and the fears, go ahead and actually write down in your journal all of the fears and all of the what ifs that are coming up. Like make a list, write them all down, and then go through that list and write down the worst case scenario around those what ifs and how you could handle it. Write down how you could manage it. And the thing that I find really interesting about this particular practice is that it turns out that all of those scary what ifs that your ego comes up with are actually quite manageable if they were to happen, and they are unlikely to happen. These are all catastrophic worst case scenarios that your ego comes up with. It's very unlikely that any of them will happen. If any, it'll probably just be one of them. And they're actually quite manageable, and you realize that when you do this journaling exercise, and you already have a solution for all of those things written in your journal when you do this exercise. So if one of those things comes up, just open up your journal and see how you said you would handle it. Okay, hopefully this has been helpful today. This is something I'm really passionate about, making aligned choices and allowing your higher self to just guide you through life and allow you to follow your bliss. It's just such a beautiful shift in perspective in life. It makes life so much more fulfilling and so much easier. I just want to thank everyone for the follows, the downloads, the reviews, the ratings. It's amazing. I'm so appreciative. If you do enjoy this podcast and want to support it, share with your friends, follow, download episodes, leave a rating, leave a review. These are all amazing ways that you can help support it. Thank you so much, everyone, and I will speak with you next week.